Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet here today. I want to acknowledge that this is stolen land. It was never ceded. I want to thank Uncle Dave for the welcome to country and welcome all First Nations peoples here, if we have any in the audience. As we say to our members, there won't be any justice for the working class until we first fight alongside our First Nations peoples for justice for them. This is a very important event and a coming together of working class people and organisations to fight for what is a fundamental human right, and that's the right to housing. And I want to make the point, we've got a bit of, I want to make the point about Millers Point. The first public housing estate in this country was Millers Point, Maritime workers. And it was an area of Sydney that was the forgotten area, where the workers themselves toiled day and night under the most brutal of conditions and lived in the most horrendous of establishments, slums. It was an area that we've seen at one stage, the bubonic plague down that end of Sydney. And I want to recognise and acknowledge the fighting spirit of the Millers Point working class community. Barney Gardner can't make it today because he's crook. But Barney, along with the other leaders and the community, fought against this system and the previous state Liberal government, which its agenda wasn't the first of the establishment of social cleansing, because that started about 35 years ago when it comes to public housing. I have family. I'm from Sydney. I'm from Western Sydney. Grew up out of Warwick Farm. If it wasn't for public housing, we wouldn't have that dignity of life that we grew up. I've got family that are in public housing. It's not just the inner west that we see in cities. It's the forgotten of the working class in our towns and outer suburbs. And those homes have been depleted because of neglect by government, depleted. And those communities and families are subjected to dealing with that on their own, and we're talking about not standards that we expect for 2023. Public housing come about because of the Second World War, where working class men and women come back after fighting a fascist and demanded a whole host of things. One was housing, the right to housing. One was the right to good jobs, decent jobs. And we got organised, and the establishment feared that. And one of our demands was decent housing, public housing. And I say it from a working class perspective, because it is the working class that have fought for everything that we have delivered for our own dignity, and we lift up those that don't. We don't have a public housing policy. The current New South Wales government just handed down a budget, and less than 2% of that budget has been allocated to public housing. Shame on the Minns government. It's social cleansing is what it is. The forced removal of communities like Waterloo, like Millers Point and the surrounding areas. It's forced because of the rich and the powerful, the political elite. So it is very important that we come together, because we've got to fight a system to overthrow what fundamentally is against our class interest. And coming together is the first stage on how we do that. What we need to do is blockade. What we need to do is fight back to establish for the current generation of working class communities men and women and their families, our families, and for future generations, that the right to public housing is a fundamental right, and it is an obligation of governments. They have a role to play, and we will make them accountable. It's important to organise on that basis in order for the changes that we need, because we know that there's a housing crisis. How many here, just a show of hands, rent? Yeah, okay. Well, you're at the whim of the landlord, aren't you? Yeah. How many here are in public housing? And that's a reflection. That's a reflection of the failure of government. Because working class people don't want to be handing over their money, their rent, to some landlord. They want it to be owned by the state. We want it to be owned by the state. Public housing, not social housing. Yes. I make that point because the distortion of this whole agenda in the political establishment has been narrowed and focused to a point. And because we have nothing, we see that them crumbs is something. That's not enough. And that's why the MUA, and the MUA Sydney branch especially, is very proud to host this event. We will be fighting on the front line. Solidarity to you all, and we have a world to win. Thank you, comrades.